So obviously we're launching a new interview series, and you are our first honoured guest. So a good
Well,
day.
hopefully I can live up to that hype.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. So I'd love you just to introduce yourself real quick. Just tell us a bit about yourself, what your background is, your professional experience, and your academic experience.
Sure. My name is Stephen Hitchcock. I'm a lecturer at the University of Sydney Business School. I currently work in the Work Integrated Learning Hub. So I teach units including industry placement programs, self-source placements. Part of what I've been doing over the past year and a half is teaching study tours. So I've taken students to the Philippines, to China, things like that. Before I was in this role, I was teaching the core for the Bachelor of Commerce. I did that for a few years. But I'm originally from New Zealand. I did my undergraduate master's there, worked in advertising for a few years, and then ended up moving to the States to do a PhD. And then I ended up here in Sydney where I am now.
A lot of things. And most importantly, you're a Kiwi. There we go.
Apparently, yeah.
Fantastic. Look, I'd love just to open up the floor and just to ask you about university right now is obviously not on campus. It's a bit different. It's running a little bit differently. And I'd love just to run us through a couple of those changes. So particularly, I know some people have heard about a CWAM and that relates to their university. If you could just give us a quick rundown of that from the university's perspective, that would be great.
Yeah, so I can certainly give you my perspective and my understanding of it. So the CWAM stands for Converted WAM, and what that means is, well, it's an effort on the university's part to ensure that no student is disadvantaged because of the COVID circumstance at the moment. So what I think that means materially, from what I understand, is that your converted WAM will appear on your transcript. And when you apply for and the converted WAM will basically exclude your grades from semester 1, 2020. And that means that when you apply for things like if you want to apply for a master's program or you're applying for different things within the university, that converted WAM is going to be what we look at. So that's in essence what it is.
Fantastic. So it can take a little bit of pressure off students because this semester is not as impactful if something were to go wrong.
I think ultimately that's the idea, right? It's to try and take that pressure off, and it means that students aren't so much worried about their WAM. I mean, certainly we want, and I think that everyone wants students to be putting their best foot forward with their studies.
Yeah.
But I think it is absolutely a pressure relief kind of system, right? It's just meant to mean that students don't have to worry so much about necessarily what precise grade they're getting. Exactly. So that's my understanding of it.
And so I guess on the flip side of that, in terms of depressurizing this semester, I know a lot of students are quite stressed, either getting lots of fun and maybe not performing as well because they're doing things differently, or just not very motivated at all. I know you can talk a bit to the sort of support systems available at uni. I'd love just a little insight in what is going on there and what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a bunch of stuff that's available to students. I think the first thing to say is that the university and I think myself as a teacher is making a lot of efforts in terms of supporting our students and trying to ensure that we give students assistance where we can. There's a couple of things that are really important to know. I think for business school students specifically, we have a team of people that's set up where students are able to direct their inquiries to, particularly in the realm of their studies. So if you get stuck or you have some concerns around your enrollment or progression or things like that, there's an email address which I can share with you that you'll be able to email and get assistance.
Yeah, we'll definitely have all the
but I think yeah, and then beyond that, I think there's a couple of other things that are really important to think about. I think first off, the point you made about people maybe not necessarily feeling motivated or students sort of just sort of struggling to kind of engage. I mean, I think that is a really understandable thing to be happening. And I think we're all going to respond differently. I think one of the things that I personally would strongly suggest is that students really prioritize their sort of their mental health and where they're at. I know the Chief Medical Officer in Australia has talked a lot about this, about how absolutely sort of living in these circumstances can sort of induce or exacerbate sort of mental health conditions.
The amount of isolation that is.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot of services available. Again, I can share a bunch of links with you just in terms of the different services that are available outside of the university. There's great resources like Beyond Blue, the Black Dog Institute, for example. Lifeline's fantastic. Of course, you've got CAPS, which is available to you as well. And I think the thing that I would really stress with students, especially when it comes to mental health, is it can be really hard to know where you're at. And I think taking advantage of these services and having a chat to someone and viewing it as kind of like a maintenance kind of thing can be really useful as well.
You'd see it as like preemptive almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of being proactive with your mental health. Because I think that these are really quite unusual times. And I think you or I, or your parents can give advice.
Yeah.
These are quite extraordinary times, and it's maybe not something that a lot of people have experienced dealing with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's very strange for myself. I guess isolation kind of disconnects you from people who could be good to talk to, and it comes to mental health, and we may need another outlet for that. So it's always good to be preemptive on those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's a couple of things to keep in mind there. I mean, one of them is, like I said, I really can't emphasize enough sort of the importance of being sort of proactive with your mental health. I know that personally, since we've sort of gone into this kind of working from home kind of space, I know that I've historically gone to a therapist, and I've continued my therapy on. I do my sessions fortnightly online, which I found to be really, really beneficial.
That's fantastic. I know my mum's actually a counsellor, so yeah. she's had to switch to online, and it's a really good thing to see that people are still connecting through and managing to find a way, because it is really important. And I feel for the people who feel disconnected right now, who need that and don't have access to it, or a job and can't afford it.
Well, look, the other thing that you can do as well in terms of that social stuff, something that I've been doing with a lot of my mates is so on Saturday night, we've been having a board game night, right? Where we'll sort of jump online and maybe have a drink and play some board games online. Do that, just general talk shit, right? And I think introducing that kind of normality back is really great. The other thing that I've done a little bit of is Friday night drinks with my workmates. So just like 5 o'clock on a Friday, just jumping on and just like complaining about stuff like you do on Friday night drinks. So that can be an option as well. And I think anything that you can do to help kind of build and forge those social connections. There's been a lot of research within psychology that have found that, social isolation can have a bunch of negative side effects. And so giving yourself the opportunity to talk to others and reaching out is so important. So I'd really strongly advise it. It's not as available for everyone. And I think the other thing to stress is, like, I know that it's not necessarily the most exciting thing. But I think a big part of it is, like I said, it's about sort of connecting. It's about keeping up that community and staying in touch with people, because it's not just about you as well, right? I think all of us need some social connection, and all of us need that support. And it's a great opportunity to talk to your mates and figure out how they're doing and give you that opportunity to reach out to them as well.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit exciting actually to me as well. You kind of get this opportunity to do different things. I know my friends jumped on and did like a poker night one night. We did like a Pictionary night, another one. We did an Olympic game version of Countdown. Like you can kind of spice up your social life. Things to do. It's kind of exciting.
Exactly, and you don't have to get the train home at the end, which is a big
exactly, yeah. Because for us particularly, I live on the beaches, so it's an hour and a half right home. Now, moving a little bit into more student life and experience of university this semester, it's a difficult semester. And I know you've got a particularly strong ethos for learning. I think you've been basically in academia in some degree your whole life, not in terms of teaching necessarily, but in terms of learning the whole time. And so you've quite a strong insight, which is really, really good for students right now. So I'd just love to hear what's your ethos right now? What's your thoughts on how students can go about learning and how they should be in their mentality about learning?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. I mean, the first thing that I want to say there is it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. I think all of us are going to respond to the circumstance very differently. And I think it's really important that you have sort of a conversation with yourself, and you have a conversation with your friends and your family, and figure out where you're at and what you're capable of at the moment. I think my general ethos towards studying and just in terms of doing anything in life really is being an active participant either way. So if you want to say, look, I'm not doing so well, I'm going to really focus on my mental health, I'm going to really focus on my social life, then make that active decision and structure activities around that. You know, go to your classes, do your study, but make sure you're prioritizing that other stuff. Equally, if you're one of those students that says, I'm going to throw myself into my studies, I'm going to try and really do as well as I can this semester, really take advantage of this time I have, fantastic, make that decision as well. I guess my general advice though is it's really easy to fall into this trap of being kind of passive and just sort of feel like you're just sort of going with it and you don't feel like you have any control. And certainly there's a lot of control that we don't have, but trying to kind of be the master of your own domain where you can. So part of the reason I'm saying this is, as you mentioned, I've been a student my whole life. I think, you know, I'm 32 now. My parents had me enrolled in preschool when I was 2 or 3, and I think there hasn't been a year that I haven't been enrolled in some kind of program, right? And I'm thinking specifically about my experience with my PhD, because a PhD is an experience where essentially for 2 or 3 years, you end up sitting in your room on your own writing. And look, it's not entirely the same, but there are certainly, you know, there are connections there. My best piece of advice is find reasons why for everything. So when you wake up in the morning, you want to have a reason why you want to get up and work on your computer and do your uni stuff. You want to have a reason why you want to get on and chat with your mates. And I think that's a little bit different from finding reasons, you know, why not, or even worse, sort of being motivated by some kind of fear, right? So rather than saying, oh shit, if I don't get up, I'm going to do really badly, saying, I really want to get up because, hey, look, I actually really enjoy finance stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I actually want to go along and I want to do my best and learn this new thing about finance. And I found personally that having those kind of framing devices in my head have really fundamentally changed my relationship with my studies and my work.
There's something beyond just getting a good mark.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's especially true in times of pressure is reminding yourself why you're there and why you're doing it. I think is really key.
Yeah, of course. I think it's a really important message to be engaged with what you're doing and know why you're doing it. And I know my reasons extend long beyond uni, graduate roles and beyond. And it makes it a lot easier to get through a semester like this, for sure. What did you do for your PhD, by the way?
So my PhD is in human communication. Specifically, my PhD's topic was focused about how people of different ages and generations can work and communicate and perceive one another. So I looked quite closely at, sort of the generational differences in the workplace and these narratives and sort of what they mean, if anything.
Yeah, wow. Okay, that's very specific, but very interesting.
PhDs tend to be super specific.
Was there like a strong conclusion you came to?
Yeah, I mean, look, the conclusion that I came to really built off a number of other works that have been undertaken in the past kind of century. And one of the conclusions that I drew was that essentially generational differences as we talk about them don't mean as much as we think they do. You know, you hear a lot of very reductionist narratives around like, oh, generation X is like this, baby boomers are like this, or hey, there's this generational conflict. My PhD, my research was unique within the context of the field because when I went into the field, I didn't say to people, hey, you're a millennial, what do you think about baby boomers, right? I just asked people what they thought about different people they worked with, different ages and things like that. And I think what was most interesting in my research was that the response generally was really positive. You know, I found that people were really excited. So for example, I found younger people working in organizations were really excited to work with more senior people. They were like, well, look, they know a bunch of stuff that I don't know. And I can really learn a lot from them in terms of how I'm approaching this workforce or how they're potentially thinking about building their careers or getting mentoring or things like that. And I think one of the conclusions, and I think one of the more sensationalist headlines I've often used, is that in many ways I've found that the generational archetypes, as we talk about them, millennials and Gen X and baby boomers, are kind of just like a corporate zodiac more than anything, right? Like they serve this function in terms of like helping us to kind of maybe make sense of what's going on around us. And look, absolutely, there's some truth in them, but they also don't define us, and they certainly don't have any control over us. And I think it's just really important to take a step back and realize that no, you're not sort of stuck with this inescapable cultural impress from the time in which you grew up.
You seem to become a better candidate for this interview every time I talk to you. That's really interesting to understand, I guess, how generations work together and how they see themselves and see others.
Yeah.
I know we label ourselves millennials all the time, but maybe it's not as important as we think it might be.
Yeah, look, and I think a big part of it is there's a social function to them. There's absolutely a social function to them, because for people who grow up in different times, you're going to have different kind of cultural touchstones, right? Like you're going to have different events.
Yes.
But identity is really important, right? All of us every day are engaging in active processes where we identify with certain identity targets, whether it's being a millennial or being a young person or being an Australian or whatever it is. And at the same time, we disidentify from others. We say, well, actually, no, I'm not an elite sportsman, or I'm not one of those students that can just grind out 12 hours of study every day, right? But that process is really important because identity is a really fundamental concept to who we are. And the reason that generations get used so much is that they're kind of, they are very easy things to communicate about because we all understand them, and they help give us a sense of identity, which is actually really important, especially in the context of work, I think. But I think what's important is that we don't let that stuff necessarily entirely define us, nor do we allow it to control us. Look, and the other thing to keep in mind is that technically organizations aren't able to or aren't allowed to make age-based policies, right? I mean, there's a whole lot of protections about that. But it's really important that you don't generalize. You don't go into an organization as a young person and say, oh, my bosses are all baby boomers, they're not going to understand this tech thing. And conversely, you don't want to be the young person going to the office who ends up fixing the printer by virtue of being born in the 1990s. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that they're there and they do serve a social function, but at the same time they don't control us. I mean, to be a little bit of a pedantic academic, there's a beautiful quote by Michel Foucault, who's a French philosopher, who talked about this, right? He said, it's not that everything is bad, but everything is dangerous. So it's not so much about saying, oh, generational archetypes are bad and we shouldn't talk about it. It's like, hey, look, they have some utility, but if we overuse them and over-apply them and let them control us, they become a dangerous thing. So we just need to be aware of that.
That's a really good way of putting it. Wow, I didn't expect to get that insight today. There we go. Thank you for that. Now, I think you as a lifelong learner, this is a similar question, but I'm intrigued what you think students could be doing right now. I know I picked up other skills. I made this bottle recently, painted this.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I know. I've been picking up some random things and trying different things, but what would you kind of give to students as advice in terms of what they could be learning or what things they could be developing to or dedicating to in this new world that we're kind of living in for however long it is?
Well, look, I think that's a great question. Look, a couple of things. I think first off, like I said, taking a really individualistic approach where you figure out how much time and capacity you have to learn stuff. And also figuring out what kind of stuff makes you happy. I'll give you a really good example. So a few years ago, it was really stressful at work. And I was finding it really hard and I wasn't coping very well. And I remember my therapist at the time was like, hey, look, you should take up painting. like, painting is real, as a different therapist. She's like, you should take up painting. She's like, you know, really important to have like an art form and something you can help you do to decompress. Now I took up painting and I bought a whole lot of paints and I started doing this stuff, and I actually found it really stressful, right? Because I was like, I'm not very good at art. I'm really shit at this. I don't really enjoy it that much. It's super messy and getting paint everywhere. One of the things I learned was that, yeah, absolutely. A bunch of people find painting and art really a great expression, but it's not for me, right? So again, just stress the fact that one size fits all approach doesn't work.
Yeah.
However, if the broader question is, well, look, what can we do to sort of feel productive? There's a lot of little things that you can do. I think setting yourself, obviously, like little goals, like, you know, setting yourself SMART goals for the Buzz 2000 graduates out there, that can be really, really important. Some of the things that I've been doing, for example, so I've been studying Chinese for the past past 12 months. And so I've switched to taking online Chinese classes. I've been increasing how much I've been doing on Duolingo every day, doing stuff like that.
Fantastic.
The other thing that I've been looking at is I've been doing a few free courses. So you can actually do free courses via like Harvard, Stanford, MIT offer these free courses that you can do. Yeah, and so I've signed up for a classics course that starts, I think, when the SEM2, the second semester in the United States starts, the fall semester. So I'm going to be doing that. And look, I'll be really honest. I really enjoy studying languages and I really enjoy studying stuff. But sort of every day, it can be a little bit hard to motivate yourself. But I guess in many ways, I'm doing these things to give my time structure, you know, and to give myself something to look forward to and projects to work on. I think that at the moment, one of the things that I've personally experienced in this long period of sort of working from home or hibernating or whatever it is we're calling it, is that time becomes kind of amorphous. You know, you kind of lose track of what day it is. I mean, it's kind of like my bed, my couch, my kitchen, and my computer desk.
Flow between.
I go for a walk every day. Yeah. And so just giving my day structure and giving myself things to look forward to and things that I enjoy doing is really important. So whatever it is, I mean, the other thing as well is just do whatever's right for you. I mean, look, there's no particular virtue in learning a language versus anything else. I mean, I've also been ramping up my sort of like video game time. I've been playing more video games.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, sure. And so like I've been setting myself goals with that in terms of like ranking up in certain things. And,
I love it.
Yeah. And so look, whatever you do, I think it's just important to try where you can to have things to look forward to, and setting yourself structure and setting yourself sort of SMART goals within that can be really important.
So I think your key piece of advice is, if you're going to play video games, at least have a goal in mind.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, or not. Look, I've been playing Animal Crossing, and really, there's not a lot of purpose there. I'm just sort of like fishing and planting flowers. But hey, it's something.
It's something. Yeah. I mean, I'm reading lots. I'm actually on Duolingo too, trying to learn Spanish. After I'm back in Ecuador, I wanted to build that up so I could go back. There's lots of little things we can be doing that are kind of fun. I've got a chess book as well. Lots of different things. I kind of on a similar tangent. It is difficult right now to study. I know weirdly something people might not know about me is I actually wrote a study guide when I was a tutor about 3 years ago. I looked into a lot of the kind of psychology behind studying. And I guess one piece of advice I would give is always have different stages of reward and recognition for yourself. So I would always structure it as a task recognition. So when I finish a task, I can jump on Facebook, and that's like my little recognition that like, I get this little dopamine hit, this enjoyable thing for completing this task, but I can't do it until then. And then I'd have like maybe a week-long milestone of some description. So it's like at the end of this week, if I've got these 3 things done, I'm going to go and take the night off and do this thing. And then I have extended milestones. So when I complete this course, when I complete this module or something, I can take myself out for dinner. Come right out, take myself to dinner. So do something. I think that piece of advice is handy. But do you have anything yourself in terms of study techniques or ways to keep yourself moving forward and keep yourself studying at an effective rate? Because we kind of have more time now, but it's harder to use it.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really important is the hardest thing is starting. I have
Yeah.
found when it comes to my studies. So the idea of sitting down and knocking out 4 hours of your capstone marketing readings or whatever maybe doesn't sound very like appealing on paper. It seems really intimidating. Often what I've done is I've set myself a goal, which is simply to sit down and read one paper, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm just going to do half an hour, right? I'm like just going to do half an hour of writing today. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to just do half an hour of my finance paper.
Yeah.
And then at the end of that half hour, if you're really hating it, just kind of stopping and either having a break or doing something else. I think for me, that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned, is this whole kind of idea of just swallowing the frog and just sitting down and just making a start. And there's two parts of that. I think the first thing is that often the idea of it is a lot worse than it really is. The material reality isn't as scary or difficult as you're making it out to be.
Yeah.
But I think the other part of it as well is also giving yourself that out. Like some days you just can't, right? And so sitting down and saying, look, I did my half an hour. I did what I said I was going to do. I'm going to tap out and I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah.
I think what's really important, and it comes back to this whole SMART goal thing, is thinking about what is a realistic goal. I've been talking about this for years. Anyone who I taught in Buzz 1000 will have heard me rant on about this. I think a lot of students have really unsustainable attitudes towards studying, especially early in their degree. I think a lot of students, especially when you're like your first year, second year, draw up these kind of crazy study plans where it's like, wake up at 7 a.m., have breakfast, study for an hour and a half, go to uni, go to class, study in the library for 3 hours, go to class, study library 3 hours, have dinner, study 4 hours, 30 minutes Netflix. Like that's not a thing, right? Like no one does that. It's insane. In fact, there's a few years ago, I was doing some research into this, and I think there's some pretty good psychology research that's found that essentially you have about 2 to 3 good intellectual hours in you a day.
Yeah.
Beyond that, you've got another couple of hours where you can maybe do a little bit of revision and stuff. But realistically, there's only about 2 to 3 good learning hours, and you've only got about 5 good brain hours in your day. And so just figure out how you want to spend that time. I don't think I'm making this up. I'm pretty sure there's some good psychology research here. And so just be honest with yourself, right? And I do that, like, even with my work days, I normally put the work that is the most cognitively complex up the front. Mm-hmm. So normally the work that I start the day with is normally I try and do a little bit of grading every morning. So whatever I'm doing, I'll normally have some grading to do. So I'll always try and do like 30 minutes to an hour. I'll try and grade 2 or 3 papers if I can. And then, like, let's say I also am working on some course design. So for example, yesterday I was writing a brief for the winter practicum I'm teaching. And so I spent, 2 or 3 hours writing that brief. And then the rest of my afternoon I spent doing emails, paperwork, meetings. And so that's the other part of it, is recognizing I only have so many good cognitive hours, leading with those in the day. And then the rest of the day doing stuff that you don't need as much brain power for, like meetings.
Yes.
Just kind of sit there. And that whatnot. So yeah, it's about recognizing how much time you have. And I think it's about structuring your day around that. And look, absolutely remembering that the whole 9 to 5 is a very artificial construct, right? Like where you're at on any given day is going to depend a lot on your mental health. It's going to depend on your physical health. It's going to depend on how well you've been sleeping and eating and exercising. So if you need to take an hour and a half lunch break and play some Animal Crossing, then do that, right? Like don't.
Seems to be a big fan.
Yeah.
But I think that's I absolutely love that advice. The whole energy curve is critical to understanding. But I think we're kind of breaking that 9 to 5 now, which is handy. Like we have this time where it's like you can work at 11 p.m. at night or you can work at 6 a.m. in the morning. Mm-hmm. I have a friend who wakes up at 4:44 every morning, and that's when he starts working. Mm-hmm. And that's just how he does it. Always
Oh
4:44.
yeah.
Very
Look,
specific.
everyone's different. When I was at grad school, I was living in Phoenix, and environmentally, I found it really tough because Phoenix is super hot.
Mm,
And so it was also tricky as well because it meant that during the day, because of the time zone difference, I wasn't able to talk to my friends and family.
yeah.
And so what ended up happening is I ended up sort of becoming nocturnal for like 2 years, where I would wake up at about 3 in the afternoon. I would go and I would teach some evening classes. I would come home and I'd have dinner and I'd chat to my friends in New Zealand. I'd do a bit of work, and then I'd go to bed at about like 5 or 6 in the morning.
Oh,
Certainly
wow.
not advocating that as like a life choice.
Maybe
Um,
not the most effective right now.
but look,
Certainly
it
a
made
lot.
a lot of sense for me at the time. And the other reason that I liked it is because I lived in a house with 5 other students, with 5 other grad students. And the
Yeah.
problem was our internet connection was really bad during the day because everyone was up using the internet. And so the other reason why I really liked it is because, especially at night, like if I was wanting to do research and I was wanting to download articles, or I was using some sort of like analysis software that was cloud-based and I needed the web connection, it actually worked out being really
You've got a
well. So
monopoly on
yeah,
the
I'm
web connection.
absolutely, yeah, not necessarily advocating being nocturnal, but what I am advocating is looking at your circumstance, figuring out what it is you need, and allowing yourself to structure that time. The one thing that I would advise, and I think that this is advice that's become quite important to me, is especially when you are kind of just living in your own little house bubble, is parceling out your time and having time where it's work time and having time where it's not. So even now, I turn my work computer off at 5 to my work. I close my work emails at 5:30, and then I just bum around. Right, I just watch some Netflix or have some dinner, or I play some video games or whatever. I
Yeah.
think the thing that can become really overwhelming is where everything time is like nothing time,
Yeah.
and you're sort of just bouncing between things all day. So my advice is absolutely you can be flexible and you can figure out what works for you, but do try and have some kind of routine and do try and parcel out your time. And the reason that I say this is a lesson I learned in my PhD, because you realistically can't work all the time, but it's an easy trap to fall into, especially when you've got undergraduate studies. So much stuff going on, there's always something you could be doing.
Hmm.
And if your computer's always sitting there, you can say, oh, I should be writing right now, I should be writing right now, I could be doing some readings. Do your work for the day, then say, that's enough, that's okay, I'm now going to do something else.
I
So
think
that would be
that's
my advice. Yeah.
critical. I think that advice is beyond critical because right now we have all this time we can work in, and within that time we feel like you should be working.
Mm-hmm.
You can really mess yourself up if you get into that mentality or get angry at yourself because you're not working when you could be.
Yeah.
But you should be working when you should be working. You take on as much as you want to do for the day and get that done and then stop. It's going to make you enjoy your sort of social life, maybe just the two parents that are around or whoever, but make you enjoy it a lot more and feel a lot more fulfilled, especially if you have a task that is something you can be like, this is what I need to get done today, and if I get this done, I've done enough. If you do more, great, but that's your sort of accomplishment for the day.
Yeah. Look, and I think the other piece of advice within this that I would suggest to students is more just general advice about how to study and how to approach your studies. Learning is a complex, messy process, as is writing a good assignment. I think one of the ways that I think is really good to take the pressure off is, let's imagine you've got an assignment due. I think a lot of students sit down and they're like, I want to use my time as efficiently as possible, right? I don't want to be, blah, 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 working on this forever. And so a lot of students have this idea of an assignment where they start at the beginning and they finish at the end and they write one paragraph at a time and they edit it and then they finish their paper, maybe do a quick proofread and then submit it. In my experience, that's not where good writing comes from. Good writing comes from iteration. Good writing comes from taking a big block of marble and sculpting it down. And by that, I mean, my process to an approaching assignment is that absorption phase where I'm just reading and doing a bunch of stuff. And then what I normally do is I take a piece of paper, and I actually have one here, And so this is an assignment I'm working on for myself at the moment. It's a project I'm working on. And I just take a piece of note paper and I just sketch out the draft, just in terms of here are my paragraphs, here are my key points, and here's the narrative structure. The next stage for me is what I call the word vomit draft, where I just sit down and I just write everything in my head. I don't correct spelling, I don't correct grammar. Sometimes it's just really rough and ready. It's like colloquial, or I might be swearing, and you know, like it's just a real gross block of words. And then the next step for me is to go and start parceling that out and editing. And I think that that's a really important approach to take. And part of the reason I take that approach is that it mentally is much easier for me to approach, right?
Yes.
Like if I say to myself, I have to sit down and write my think assignment, that sounds really scary. But if I say, I'm going to sit down and read an article today, I'm going to sit down and just word vomit today, I'm going to sit down and just edit some of my word vomit today. Like they're distinct steps and they're a lot easier to approach. And look, I know that not everyone necessarily works this way by default, but I really believe that iteration is key when it comes to university assignments. So for example, my PhD, which was, I don't know, 60, 80,000 words or something like that. The final submission was draft 27. It was 27 drafts, right?
They all saved as different files in your computer?
Yeah, I have them all. Oh. And within that, I have 120,000 words that was cut. So I have a document that is my cut out stuff that is nearly twice as long as my PhD. And it's just, you know, and I think this is the thing that I often stress to students is understand that good work, I think, is iterative and it can be at times messy. And so allowing it to be iterative and messy is really important. Don't put the pressure on yourself to sit down and write like a perfect assignment.
Yeah, it's not the stage one process.
Yeah, and like there's lots of little things. Like one of the things that I do is like referencing. So like when I'm doing my writing a paper, I will often just bookmark the articles that I'm using, and then in brackets, I'll just put a quick in-text citation and then close the bracket, and then I'll move on. My referencing is literally the last thing I do. Yes. Right? Like when I do my referencing, it is the last thing I do. And I sit there with the APA guide and I do it perfectly. Yeah. Because, I mean, a lot of students know referencing is like, for example, like it's an easy thing to do, but it's also very easy to lose a lot of marks on if you don't do it properly.
Very frustrating sometimes.
Yeah. And so doing like your referencing last, you know, whatever your approach is, I think it's important to recognize that. But I guess my point here is a staged approach to work and allowing it to be staged and messy. Don't just say, okay, Sunday I'm going to write my think assignment. In my experience, that's not really a way that you can work or do good work. I mean, yeah, for sure. Like I could sit down and like, if you said to me, I need you to write the assignment in one day. Yeah, absolutely. I could probably knock out solid credit, maybe a low distinction in one day, right? But it's not going to be that good. Like if you're really wanting to do really good work, it needs to be that.
I'd be impressed with that, to be honest, especially in look, that advice all around has been fantastic. I do have one more question, and I think that's just, what are you most excited for next semester, for the end of this year? What are you looking forward to getting back? What are you looking forward to doing differently? What excites you right now?
I mean, there's a few things that I'm looking forward to. Like at the moment, I'm really excited. I'm currently designing a practicum for winter. A practicum is like a special project unit where you essentially do a consulting project.
Oh, wow.
And we're doing a really unique project this July. So the project that we're actually working on is the client is actually going to be the University of Sydney Business School itself. And students are going to be tasked with consulting with the senior leadership in the business school and designing a potential solution to help drive student learner engagement, student community and connection.
How can we
really excited to that?
Is there a way students can find out more?
Yeah, I'll flick you the details.
Fantastic.
I can
Thank
give you
you.
the
I'll
link
link it
codes
in.
and things if you'd like to pass that on. But I think it should be a really interesting and exciting project. In terms of semester two, I have a couple of other different projects that I'm working on in terms of placements and self-source placements. We're currently developing that model to try and see what
Yeah,
we can do to allow students to have more niche kind of experience. We have industry placement program, which is awesome. But
exciting.
the
Yeah.
problem with IPP is that we tend to only work with bigger clients just because of the kind of volumes we're trafficking in. Whereas self-sourced gives you the opportunity. If you're really interested in a niche industry, like if you want to say, I really am interested in the video game industry, or I'm really interested in sports, like let's say that you could get yourself an internship at the Sydney Swans, right?
Yeah.
Then self-sourced is a way for you to get course credit as a part of that. So we're
Ah,
currently revising that model. So that's cool. Look, personally, I've got a few things that I'm really interested in. I'm excited about. I think that maybe there's maybe an opportunity for me to travel home, get back to New Zealand, maybe later this year.
oh, yeah. Wow.
That might be an opportunity. And then there's a few other options in there. I mean, there's some video games coming out that I'm really excited about in June and July.
What's the
And
number
then
one?
there's a game coming out in September called Cyberpunk 2077,
I think it
which
rings a
is,
bell.
yeah, it's the team that made The Witcher 3. Very excited about that. That should be really cool. And look, I think, I'll be honest, this year's been really ups and downs for me. The year started really well. I had a really great, I led a study tour to the Philippines, looking at innovation and creating shared value and things in the Philippines. We visited these indigenous tribes in the Philippines, and we went to these rural areas and we looked at these startups. And it's all well and good to pick up a packet of chocolate or peanut brittle and read a story about someone, but to actually go to this rural community in the Philippines and meet the lady who creates the peanut brittle and listening to her story about, really powerful. But my fiance and I had a 6-week trip to Europe that was booked,
Oh, no.
due to leave in a month, and unfortunately that was all cancelled. And so that's obviously really disappointing. But
Yeah, that's for
I think
sure.
a big part of what I've done is try to give myself new things to look forward to, whether it's a new class that I'm teaching, a new project that I'm working on, a new video game coming out, or sort of those longer goals. So saying, maybe there's an opportunity by December I'm able to travel home for Christmas and visit my family.
Exciting.
So figure out what you can and give yourself, again, those smart goals.
Yeah, smart goals.
What
Always
about you? What are you looking forward to?
what am I looking forward to for the next semester? I don't expect to flip the interview. You've caught me by surprise. What am I looking forward to? I had a bunch of travel kind of booked in as well. So that's been a bit frustrating, but I'm very much looking forward to hopefully at some point getting back to that. I don't know how that's going to play out. If it's going to be, early semester two, we start traveling again, or if it's not going to be till next year sometime. So I'm very excited for that. It's something that drives me a lot. And I'm really excited to actually see friends in person in bigger groups. Would be unreal. I think, yeah, we haven't really been able to do much. I mean, I often like going on road trips and little bits and pieces. So I think my friends and I are going to get a big group of 10, because that's huge for us now. Have to do a road trip somewhere. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like we were talking about before, totally can empathize with that. My mates and I, that I went to uni with, we used to flat together, and we're all living around the world now. I have some of us who are living in Sydney, Auckland, Singapore, London, and New York, doing different bits and pieces.
Wow.
And normally, once every 2 years, we will go do a holiday. So we were meant to go to, I think we were looking at going to Southeast Asia. We're looking at going to Vietnam in November. We've had to call that.
Yeah.
But we've also started seeing what other kind of social activities and whatever other things that we can do at the time.
Yeah.
I think we all watched Stranger Things together recently, so we party of that. And then to pull back the curtain a little bit, give you an insight to my true geekiness. We all decided, so this Saturday night, we've decided that we're going to give Dungeons and Dragons a go. None of us have ever played it before.
I
It
love it.
seems like it's absolute like peak nerd, but we're like, why not? Let's just give some stuff a go that we've never thought about doing before.
It'll be interesting. I'm sure you'll learn a lot.
I don't know. I mean, look, it seems, I mean, one of my friends was talking about it, and the way that he explained, he said it's really just collaborative storytelling. He said, at the end of the day, that's what it is, right? It's 4 or 5 people sitting around a table telling a story and working together. And actually, when I was in high school, I used to do competitive theatre sports or competitive improv.
Really?
Yeah. And
Oh,
so,
no. There you go.
yeah, I mean, so look, it appeals to me. Yeah. It's just finding new things.
Yeah.
Things that you otherwise may not have thought about doing. I've given paper craft a crack, you know, where you get paper and you print things out and you make models. I've been giving that a go, you know, just it's sort of, yeah, except it's like a house, but
Oh, okay. An origami house. That sounds complicated. Look, Stephen, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure you get a lot of insights and help a lot of people. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and help us.
Yeah. Hey, look, you're very welcome. I'll send you a bunch of resources in terms of the resources available to students. I can send you the links for those classes about the special project unit in July that I'll be talking about. And I think, you know, my last piece of advice is just to make sure that, you know, you're talking to each other, you're reaching out, you're staying connected. And I'm sure I can, you know, I'm happy to personally offer, you know, if students are out there and they're really stuck or struggling and they're not sure who to talk to, you can always reach out and I can point you in the right direction of someone who you can chat to. And equally, I'm sure a lot of you have lecturers and professors who are really keen in helping you to have a great experience. So, you know, don't ever feel afraid to ask for help and to reach out.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot of goodness out of this.
Awesome.
So I will leave it there. Have a great rest of your morning and we will speak again soon, I'm sure.
Cool. Thank you so much.